a wife and a mother and an insurance agency owner, a friend, and a PTA advocate. I am so excited to talk about all of the things that I find most precious here within our community, within our lives, and within our faith, friendships, and relationships. Here on Heather's Most Precious. Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of Heather's Most Precious. I am so excited to be here with Joseph Granado. Now, Joseph, where are you? I know you travel so much.
So I am back in Texas, but about 2 days ago, I spent about 4 days in Toronto, Canada. I was a facilitator for a leadership workshop for about 80 students at Centennial College. And so I'm home for a little bit. And then I'll be going to San Diego on Tuesday to go speak at another community college there. And then I'll come back for a few days. And then I'm off to Seattle, Washington, and then Vancouver next week.
Oh my goodness. Do you ever get tired of living out of a suitcase as you have a lot of speaking engagements?
Not necessarily. I've been doing it for over 10 years now. So it's kind of like second nature to me. Anything different, I guess now would kind of be very out of the norm. So living out of a suitcase, in and out of airports, hotels, it's kind of second nature to me, and it's kind of what I've been used to.
Right. Now, I know travel has been a huge part for you as you've basically been out of college, right?
Correct.
For most of your journey.
Yeah. So after I graduated from Texas A&M, I've been basically traveling in my career in education, doing a lot of leadership development, training for both students and employees. And I've loved every minute of it. I've been to 44 out of the 50 states as a result of that. 35 different countries. Luckily for me, I don't have a family necessarily of my own. I'm single, don't have any kids. So that allows me the opportunity to travel as much as I do. But I think in the future, once I do find a partner and settle down, then I'll kind of be limited to that travel life.
Of course. So we might as well enjoy it, right?
I'm definitely enjoying it because I get to see lots of the world and not have to pay for it. So most people are like, oh, how do you get to do that? And I'm like, well, I'm very fortunate and blessed that organizations and companies and schools pay me to come out and do consulting work and facilitation work. So it's no out-of-pocket expense for me.
Mm-hmm. It does make it nice, doesn't it? Makes it affordable to be able to do it.
There was like a little hiccup because of the pandemic and COVID and stuff, but since then it's been picking up a lot more. And earlier this year, I've already been to like Mexico City, Miami, just to name a few places, and it's only March. So
that is fantastic. Now, before we get into your career, which is in higher education, are a lot of these speaking engagements directly related to your current position, or are they just because of your experience, you've built kind of this network that allows you to have this platform?
Kind of a little bit of both. So some of my training and development is directly related to my role as the Dean of Student Life. So I have a lot of experience with, working with organizations and universities and colleges to help them develop, student engagement on their campuses, especially coming out of the pandemic. A lot of campuses reached out to me asking for ideas, input, advice on how to engage their student body. And so because I've had so many experiences at a lot of different institutions, I've taken those experiences and crafted and molded unique opportunities for those campuses that bring me on to speak to their students or to their employees.
Okay, that's great. Now, I know a lot of it seems to be pretty similar in content, maybe just changing it depending on where you are in the audience that you're trying to engage with. What are some of the topics that you get to share, maybe the themes?
Yeah, I think some pretty universal topics, regardless of whether I'm in the States or abroad, have all been centered around things like effective communication, teamwork, team building, working in collaborative partnerships with other people, a lot of skills that are not necessarily taught in the classroom, or through like a formal education setting. And so a lot of the topics that I introduce and speak about have to do with what students experience outside of the standard four walls of a classroom. Especially when I work abroad, they're trying to develop their people skills so that they're a little bit more competitive when they're applying for jobs or interviewing. They have more things to say as opposed to what they just learn in the classroom.
I love that. And that helps you, right, as well, to be able to be confident in what you are sharing. And I'm sure it's neat to hear the feedback, because you are with such diverse community, right, when you are sharing and speaking. How has that been? Has the feedback been pretty good regardless of where you are?
I'll give you an example. So I had a unique opportunity to go to Fiji last November, like right around Thanksgiving. And the organization UNICEF reached out to me and said, hey, we have some colleagues that have worked with you when you lived in Hawaii, and we would love for you to come work with our students in the Pacific, in the South Pacific. And we're hosting a conference in Fiji for various populations. Are you interested? And I was like, of course, who wouldn't want to go to Fiji? And UNICEF is just a world-renowned organization that does so much for the world, for youth and impoverished communities. And so I went there, and not really knowing what to expect, but the people that I worked with, they were like, we really want you to help develop our team, our staff, regarding things like team dynamics and relationship building and working in community, networking, and some of those quote unquote soft skills that people are looking for in employees. And so I went and did a lot of retreat development with the staff members there. I was literally on a resort on the beach and out in the middle of the jungle in Fiji, and I loved every minute of it. And because of the feedback that I've gotten from that specific retreat, other organizations like UNESCO, the World Health Organization have reached out to me to go do the same thing for their respective regional departments across the world as well.
That has to feel really good to receive feedback that allows you to continue, right, on such a huge platform with huge, right, incredibly large companies.
Right. And so for me, I've been very blessed and fortunate to not necessarily have the need to market my services. It's been a lot of like word of mouth or people that are in the room observing that have connections or networks to other industries and other organizations that are wanting some of that they're not gaining necessarily in their respective organizations.
I think that's amazing. I love getting to hear about that piece. Now, I know you just told us about an incredible experience that you had in Fiji getting to do this with UNICEF. Tell me about another experience that maybe things didn't go quite as well as you wanted them to go.
Sure. So I mentioned that I've worked abroad and I've had unique opportunities working with students in different countries. And one example, when I had students in Greece, I had a unique opportunity to take students on an excursion up Mount Olympus. It's actually a real place, believe it or not. So it's in the northern part of Greece. And, I don't have a lot of background or experience in backpacking or hiking. But my role was to help students to get connected to the local community. And so I worked with an excursions coordinator to plan this 2-day hike. And so I was teaching students about leadership development, working together because they had to rely on each other for this 2-day hiking experience. And believe it or not, the first day in the first group that I took, it was raining. It was like a monsoon flash flood. And during a state of an emergency on the hike, we have to call on something called an ambimule, which, believe it or not, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's an ambulance mule that traverses up the mountain. And so I had to call this ambimule to help get us to where we needed to go and to help some of the students that weren't able to actually walk anymore on the hike. And so luckily for me, I was able to work with our excursions coordinator, who spoke full Greek and was able to navigate with local tour guides and things like that. But I'm still trying to motivate and encourage our students that are on this journey to like endure, to that it will be worthwhile at the end. And once we reached the summit on day 2, it was an unforgettable experience. I mean, the views were captivating. The fact that we were able to reach the summit of the highest point in Greece, which you only hear about like in Greek mythology, like Mount Olympus. It's not a real place. No, it's actually a legitimate location in the country. And it's very sacred, from historical standpoint. And so the students were very captivated and moved that they actually were able to experience that journey together. And we did a lot of reflection, a lot of processing after the fact and what it meant to them about kind of completing that journey. And I was helpful in the sense that I was part of that journey with them.
Wow. Goodness, that's incredible. I'm sure that you have just a piggy bank full of experiences that you can share in stories, whether it's here in the States and other countries where you have been able to engage with students and leaders, which is just incredible. How did you jump? Right now, you are currently still in higher education as the Dean of Student Life, correct?
Correct.
Yes, in Texas. And I want to get to kind of where you are now. But I would love to know what first allowed the opportunity for you to start speaking. Kind of link those together for us.
Sure. So believe it or not, I was actually interested in pursuing medicine in college. I was a pre-med major, and biology student. But I did an internship with a children's hospital in San Antonio, and it was about 150 hours that I had to complete in the pediatric oncology sector of that hospital. And I got to about hour 90 and realized it wasn't for me. And I was a junior at the time. And so it took a lot of courage for me to get to that realization that maybe this was not the path that I wanted to pursue, at least at that moment in time. And so, but I knew that I still wanted to make a difference and to make an impact in people's lives. And so I remembered my mentor from undergrad who worked in orientation, and she was my direct supervisor. And I asked her, I said, Rashonda, how do I get to do what you're doing, where you work with students, you're changing their lives, you're making an impact? I want to be like you. I want to do exactly what you're doing. And so she told me about graduate school programs, which I ended up graduating from the same program that she did. And she was also a biology major in undergrad. So there's a lot of connection there. And because of my experience as a student leader working under her, facilitating workshops for students during new student orientation, doing tours, answering questions for students and family members, and making them feel at ease, I knew that that was more suited for me in my long-term career and making that impact that way. And so I worked for 3 summers as an orientation leader and moved up each summer and assumed different responsibilities. I helped with training. I helped with curriculum development, public speaking, facilitation skills for students after me. And then that just led me into my career into higher education. And every position since then, whether that was in the States or abroad, had some direct linkage to that first position that I had many, many years ago.
That's fantastic. Now, you've talked about your mentor, and how incredible is it that you literally followed in her footsteps, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I was essentially her shadow, but then took all that she taught me specifically at that time, and then, made it my own, and then applied what she learned, what I learned from her specifically, and then was able to teach other students just the same. So I was kind of perpetuating the knowledge that I gained from her for future generations.
I think there's such beauty to that, because even if you and I were to do the same thing, and y'all did, right? You're going to do it differently, because you are your own person, right? And your strengths and weaknesses look a little bit different. So being able to take the knowledge that she gave you, you can help shape that into what you want it to look like. But I think that's amazing that you had someone that was willing to hold your hand and guide you through the process. I do think often it seems like some people are selfish with the knowledge that they have obtained. And so I think it's amazing that you saw an opportunity, asked, because you never know if you don't ask, right? If you don't have that conversation. But a simple conversation led you to where you are now. Now, do you still have a relationship with her?
Yeah. So in fact, for my birthday last year, my birthday falls right between Christmas and New Year's. And so I reached out to her. I was like, hey, I would love if you were able to spend my birthday with me. And she's like, let's go to Universal Studios. And so we booked a trip to Orlando, Florida. She had like a timeshare there. And we had an opportunity to reconnect after so long, because I had been away from the States for a while, actually. And so it had been over 10 years, and we were able to reconnect, basically pick up where we left off and ride a whole bunch of roller coasters and reminisce about, I guess, the good old days, quote unquote, because now we're living in completely separate lives from one another, but we still keep in contact. She's a reference for me. And then I've actually served as a reference for her in her career. So as she's moved different positions and moved up, she's asked me to basically be an advocate and a reference for her about the level of impact she's had on a student.
How important is it for anyone to have a mentor?
I think if you don't have one, I highly recommend that you go out and find one, whether that be a faculty member, a professor, a college counselor, someone that has a lot of wisdom and insight that they can share with you to help you on your professional journey. Might even be a friend. It might even be someone that's a neighbor or a confidant that you highly admire, that you highly respect. And so for me, I think it was essential during that transition in my life where I was no longer pursuing medicine to find someone that I could relate with and connect with, and then just being honest with them and asking that, her specifically, would you mind serving as a mentor for me? And here's why. And I've actually been asked the same question by former students, and to hear that from someone means the world. That the fact that someone looks at you and admires the work that you do and respects you enough to help guide them in their journey, is an everlasting feeling of like validation.
Right. Of course it is. Because you know that you're doing something right for them to have sought you out and to want to build that relationship. And as you've proven, you build this relationship. It becomes much more than a mentorship, right? It becomes
Right.
a friendship and lifelong, because you are going to walk through seasons. And when you have somebody that you trust enough to say, not just here's the path, walk it, but hey, with that constructive criticism too, I'm trying to make you better. This is what I see. This is what I would like to see, or this is how we can shift it to get a better result. It takes a great deal of trust, in that individual.
And I know that for me in my career now, that I'm a culmination of my experiences with other people. And so every interaction that I've had, whether that be positive or negative, has resulted in me learning about myself, learning about other people, and then adding to my skill set and my professionalism as a result of that. And so there's always something to gain with every type of human relationship. And I think mentorship relationships and dynamics specifically are the ones that will be life-changing, life-impacting.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Now, I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper into something that you just mentioned. Taking both the negative and the positive is what has helped shape you, right? And I think there's so much truth there, but I feel like there are probably two different people. There are people that only look for the positive or only look for the negative. I feel like there are very few of us that have a good balance of the two, because I think that there is definitely power when you can look at something negative. Maybe it was a negative experience, but being able to say, okay, I'm going to try to find something positive that came out of it, even if it's just that I will not treat people the way that I was treated here, right? Or maybe it's, okay, they weren't a bad leader, but I didn't agree with this piece, but that overshadowed the entire experience, and that's not right. It was just this one little bitty piece of the experience that I didn't like. Or to the positive, if we're only looking for the positive, then sometimes we're not realistic, because then we become the dreamer. What is a way or any advice that you can give us to find that balance of both the positive and negative?
I think for me, the first thing comes to mind is know what your non-negotiables are with every type of interaction that you have with any individual. And so you know what you're willing and able to tolerate, and you also know what you're not. And so when you have that self-realization for who you are and how you identify, then it makes those positive and negative interactions much more streamlined in terms of how you're going to navigate that relationship. So I'll give you an example. For me, when I worked at a specific institution, I knew that it was an elite institution. It was, it's world renowned and everyone wanted to work there. But for me, I wanted to be treated like a human being and not like a robot. That I had feelings, that I had thoughts, that I had opinions, and that I needed a seat at the table, just like everyone else. And I didn't necessarily always want to have to prove myself and my worth. And so for me, it was a big realization to take a step away from that environment. But it was that realization that I needed to kind of push me in the direction and the environments that I did want to pursue. So sometimes I think of relationships or toxic relationships as opportunities for you to really grow as a person and know what you don't deserve. People don't deserve to be treated poorly. And so if you're in a toxic situation, you have to find that strength and that power to remove yourself from that environment and find a place where you will actually thrive.
Right. That is a great way to put it. Definitely helpful. Is there a part of us that maybe spends too much time dissecting previous relationships and previous experiences that doesn't allow us to fully move forward? Or is there something that we could maybe change in us that would allow us?
I think human beings automatically gravitate towards a sense of self-sabotage and thinking that we don't deserve a life that is meant for us. And so we spend a lot of time in our head I read a lot of self-help books. I spend a lot of time in that section in Barnes and Noble. And so for me, it's like, what is it about human beings in general where we kind of paint a false reality for ourselves, but more so we need to actually pursue opportunities where we can be our best selves. And sometimes that forces us to say no, even to things that we've for a little bit have enjoyed. But if it's no longer adding value to our life, or we become stagnant or complacent, and you're wanting to grow and develop as a person, then you have to find that opportunity, that challenge, that obstacle to get you that growth that you need.
Yes, I think that's right. Now, Joseph, I know we've talked about your mentor and being able to grow into this career field. And before, you talked about being in medical school, kind of a whole different career. What inspired you initially to want to seek out higher education?
I think for me, it's realizing the investment that someone had in me as a student leader, and wanting to pay it forward and wanting to be the champion for other students in the future. Even when I was in high school, I was part of a program where my high school counselor helped me with tutoring and helped me apply for college and financial aid because I was a first generation college student. And there was so much investment in me as an individual and a heightened like ethic of care for my success. And I wanted to do the same for others. And so, and I thought medicine was going to be that route, hence why I majored in biology. But I realized there was a better connection if I used my skill set in a different way. And so when I graduated college, I was actually a biology teacher. Now, none of my students enjoyed learning about biology. They could care less about mitosis and meiosis and what the mitochondria does. But what they did care about was their future. And so I remember I had a group of seniors that I visited with after school and during lunch, and I was editing their essays for college applications. I was helping them draft responses to scholarship questions and prompts. I was hosting financial aid sessions with their parents. And a lot of the students were also like me. They were first generation as well and didn't have that support either from the counselor at the school or from their family members. And because I had been on a similar journey before them, I knew what it was like. And so I empathized with that feeling that they had, like, what's next? What's my future going to be like? And so I started doing those workshops and sessions and realized I was doing the right work in the wrong way. And in order for me to be really effective in that type of field, I needed to go and pursue a second degree. And so that's what led me to graduate school in higher education so that I could learn how to support students through all facets of life and really instill in them values so that they can become effective citizens and effective human beings. And then that's what led me into my 10 plus year career working in higher education and doing that specific career change.
I love that. I wish we had more people that truly wanted to invest in our children, right? And in students and helping, because as you said, there are so many students that don't know, right? What is the FAFSA? And parents are even struggling. My kids are not even there yet. And I remember the torture it was trying to fill it out when I was trying to go to college. And so, to make it easier and because of the way the world is today, social media is a great thing to stay connected with people. It is so negative on so many other levels. And I feel like, we wake up and the first thing we do is pick up a phone that then just everything is flying at us, a sense of overwhelming, a sense of, all of this. And now we have children that are suffering because of it, because everything's been at their fingertips, this entitlement. And I think because of that, children also, we're comparing ourselves so much more.
Correct.
Right? Things that used to start in high school, comparisons, things like that now are starting for kindergarten and first grade kids. So sometimes now, because they have this such negative and lack of self-confidence, if we are not choosing to instill in them, right, that you are valuable and you matter and you're going to do great things, sometimes they get stuck thinking that they are not worth anything, right? And so I feel like if there are not constant people, and some of them don't have people in their home life that are able to give to them what they need. And so people like you, Joseph, matter because you are choosing to do this in a heart of gold anyway, but you're choosing to help bring awareness to them, love on them, let them know that they are worth everything. What is something, how can you encourage other people to step up? I know we have teachers. I know there are other people in college and education, but for people that are not in this industry, how can we come alongside kids and help make sure that they know they matter?
Honestly, if you're in this space where you're like, how can I help students, kids know that they matter? It's getting them connected to resources first and foremost. So if you don't know anything about, how to help them in their journeys, but you have a friend that does, then connect them to that friend and be that resource that they need, so that they can start building their network accordingly. I think for me, most students that I've worked with aren't self-motivated or self-starters, at least nowadays. So they're a little hesitant or reluctant to ask for help. And so being vulnerable with them, being transparent, and then also being able to make a connection on even the simplest levels, goes a long way with students. An example of that for me is when I was working in San Diego, I had a job where I was working for a nonprofit, and that nonprofit specifically worked with underserved youth. A lot of them were immigrant students from Mexico, and their families didn't speak much English. They were English language learners themselves. And those students were trying to pass their classes, trying to apply for college. And I was trying to build relationships with them. And so I remember I saw on a kid's backpack, it was like a Pikachu, like a Pokemon, on the kid's backpack. And I was like, I remember when Pokemon first came out in the early 2000s, and it was a big thing for me growing up. And so I connected with that student and I was like, hey, do you like Pokemon? Is Pikachu like your favorite? And I just had this level of curiosity, and was invested in that student on that simple level of shared interest. And he was like, yeah, I do like Pokemon. And then I started talking to him about Pokemon cards, and that my favorite Pokemon was Eevee, and like a whole bunch of different other conversations resulted as a result of that connection. And then I was able to actually help that student after forming that simple mutual shared interest with them, and then help them long-term in that journey, before graduation. So my advice to those that are not necessarily in education, but want to help, is just form relationships, even on the simplest levels. Get on the level of a student, relate, empathize, and remember what it was like for you when you were that age.
Goodness, I love those steps that you gave, because you have to be intentional about building relationships. And I think, just you reminding us, because there's a lot of people that do not have children, or their children are grown, or maybe they have missed, and there is going to be a disconnect. If you did have children and you don't currently, in the words they say, and which are stupid, and I'm not bitter at all. Y'all wouldn't let fetch happen, and now we're saying Riz. Like, come on, this is silly. This is silly. But I think, just letting people know that you can make a difference regardless of where your career field is. I think it's so important for us to be aware that other people not only come from different backgrounds and are heading in certain directions, but that you can be a bright spot for anybody. You can allow someone to matter and to feel empowered and encouraged. it takes a moment of time and for you to be able to look around and see who needs help.
And
where
students will pick up really quickly in your level of authenticity with them. And so, and they're smarter than we think they are. They understand people's true intentions based on how you have conversations with them. And so if you're trying too hard, they will know right away and they will pick up on that energy. And so for me, it's about being authentic and, not trying to force something that isn't there. But if you're not the right person for that student, maybe connecting them with someone else is also a piece of advice that I would like to share to the audience as well. I had to learn that very quickly myself, that I may not be everyone's cup of tea, and that is okay. But there is someone out there that is. And so my job is to help connect students with individuals that they are able to relate with.
That is fantastic. Now, I don't know in Texas, here in Tennessee, we do have the Big Brothers, Big Sisters organization, some different things like that, All Pros Dads. I'm trying to think of some organizations that we do have. Do y'all have similar organizations that could be good resources as well?
Yeah. So we also have organizations like Big Brothers, Big Sisters. There's a lot of after school programs at local high schools, church communities, the YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, etc., that exist. And so I think it's really important to really know these types of resources that are available. So that way, if students are like, how do I find someone to connect with? Or if I'm looking for a volunteer opportunity to work with students, that, you can just do a simple Google search to see what's in your local community, or connect with the local community college or the local school district in your area, and then see if there's ways and opportunities for you to network with students in that way.
I would love for you to tell me, I know we've talked about parts of your career. What is your favorite piece of your role now within the Dean of Student Life?
So even though I may have lost direct contact with students, because as I've moved up in my career, I have noticed that there's less and less direct student contact. However, I'm now working with employees and staff directly that then in turn have direct contact with students. So now I'm training and educating professionals based on my own experience, and providing them skills and equipping them with the knowledge that they need to be successful in their journey. And I've had a few actually in my current position ask me, they're like, how did you become a dean of students? How do I do what you're doing? Because they are just now starting in their careers as, first or second year professional in higher education. And they're looking at me similar to how I looked at my mentor 10 plus years ago. And so I guess I'm doing something right. If I'm having employees now coming to me for advice, for counsel, for support, and I'm able to share with them from my own lived experiences, tactics and ways to navigate certain situations, or how to handle conflict, or if a student doesn't show up to a scheduled meeting, how do you ask them about their life without being too nosy and stuff like that. And so I'm now helping other professionals in their development. And I find that very rewarding. I'm also looking at large scale policy for the campus that will impact more than just a few students. And so looking at programs and funding and tuition and things of that nature that have a greater overall impact for the larger community, and kind of visualizing and seeing these are long-term decisions that will benefit future generations, even after I potentially left that role.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing that you don't think of that when you hear Dean of Student Life. You don't think of not having a ton of engagement, but how neat that you're able to still make a difference where you are. It looks different, right? With who you're encountering, but that's a neat aspect of that role that we did not anticipate. And what kind of programs and events are you the most excited about that you feel like will be able to help the most students?
Yeah. So one thing that we launched, and I say we because it was myself and my staff, there's now a food pantry or a basic needs pantry on our campus. And so this was started with about a $75,000 donation that we received from a donor. And we had noticed that a lot of students were struggling with food insecurity. A lot of students that would come to our offices were needing basic essentials for like life, anything from like toiletries to water to non-perishable food items. We even had a large population of students that are parents. And so they needed things like baby formula and diapers. And so me and my team worked on creating a basic needs pantry that is fully stocked with a lot of these items, and students can submit an application. It gets reviewed by myself and another staff member. And then we work with them similar to how like Uber Eats and like DoorDash works. So student fills out an order form, and then my team, we go in and fill in that order, and then they come and pick it up. Typically within the next 48 hours or so. And so we're just helping them in their, basic needs journey that they are requesting, so that they don't have to stress about their next meal or how am I going to be able to afford this and school. And so it's a little bit of a safety net in some ways for some of the students. And we've actually expanded that program to a student emergency fund. So students can also ask for financial assistance for things like utility bills or gas or car repairs, maintenance, things of that nature, Wi-Fi, cell phone stipends. And so this is a big retention tool for the campus that students can really focus on their education while they're enrolled.
That's fantastic. What a neat idea to be able to help and it not be broadcasted. As you said, most people in that position don't want to ask for help. They don't want to be looked at negatively, and it could be embarrassing. And so for you to have set it up in a way that it allows them to still get the necessities that they need without drawing negative attention to them is really neat. That has to feel really like a huge accomplishment that you and your team were able to put together.
And now there's so much support for this. We've actually gone into an overflow space. We've hosted a few drives within the local community for donations. We've had local businesses donate financial resources to sustain this program. And now we're actually looking at a larger space for the future. And so it's growing. We've been able to service about 400 students so far this year, since it's been created. We've worked with the local food bank as well. And now the local food bank also does like on-campus farmers markets where students that can come and receive fresh produce at no cost to them with local farmers in the area.
So I love that it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the opportunity they have. Now, I know right now you're talking about you have an abundance. Is there a way that if somebody that is not local to Midland that they would be able to contribute if they wanted?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've worked with our institutional advancement office to set up basically a crowdsourced funding page. That's a direct link. And so that can be shared out with whoever's interested. It's also available on our website, as well. And so students, that maybe they are alum and they've benefited from this program, want to continue and give back to this program, even after they graduate, they could also do that as well.
That is fantastic. And we will definitely be sharing the link in this show note as well on our social media, because I think that would be great if people would like to contribute for the students of Midland College. Now, is there a limit for these students that get to participate? Is it kind of once you've received, then that's it? Or is there a time frame?
So for the emergency fund, we've set a cap per student that applies at $500 per academic year. And so another component to this that was actually helpful with our human resources department. So faculty and staff on campus can also do a payroll deduction from their paycheck that goes straight into the student emergency fund. And so employees can set like a $5, $10, whatever kind of payroll deduction they would want to contribute. And it automatically gets deducted from their paycheck every pay period. And then there's a letter that's provided from Human Resources and our Institutional Advancement Office for tax purposes. So at the end of the year, you can write it off on your taxes as well.
Fantastic. Is there anything that y'all have, I know you may not be able to talk about, but anything that you have in the works coming up that may also benefit in a similar way?
Sure. So a couple other opportunities that I'm working with my team on. We're actually doing a large renovation project for our residence life, our dormitories on campus. And so this has been a very large capital campaign. We're in the process of raising $250,000 per building on campus to do a full gut all the way through. Wow. With new electrical, new internet, new Wi-Fi ports, plumbing, etc., security entrance points, camera installations. And so we're also crowdsourcing funding from that as well. And so people have been able to contribute so that way students have a better dorm life experience or residence life experience while living on campus. I'm launching our new Spirit group on campus. So as a result of COVID, unfortunately, campus pride and student spirit has been abysmal, to say the least. And so I'm kind of in the stages of that revival process. And so I'm awarding $500 scholarships to students that are interested in basically a pep squad and being part of the pep squad on campus. And so that scholarship can be used towards tuition, towards books, paying rent, etc. There's no limit to that. But I've been able to receive funding to help start and initiate that program.
It's fantastic. I love that you have your hand in so many, just a variety of projects. Mm-hmm. So you make sure that every student feels included. Mm-hmm. Huge, right? That's all we really want, is to feel seen and known and loved. And I think what y'all are doing there at Midland College under your direction is really making a difference. I think that's fantastic. And I think when we do things like this, when you're a part of it, so even your community there, even if people in this community here in Tennessee want to be a part, it feels good to give back. Right. It feels good to be a part of something bigger than yourself. And I would encourage people that regardless if it's this or if it's some other opportunity that comes, take part in it. It gives that same feeling as when you compliment somebody else because they look good that day, or they've done great on an assignment, right? Whatever that looks like. They need to hear it, but you also need to, because it brightens your spirit. It really does. It's that mood elevator that is an instant as you are doing things that help to brighten other people's day as well.
And the nature of the role, like student life. So I'm in charge of the livelihood on campus of the student experience. And so anything from finances to mental health to food insecurity to campus pride and spirit and affinity towards being a member of our community. All of that is encompassed with the life aspect of the role. And so making sure that students' lives are are well and they have a heightened sense of belonging and well-being, so that they're not in a feeling of discontent or disarray with their academic journey. And so I have to provide kind of like a smorgasbord of experiences that reaches a very broad audience with our student population.
Yeah, I love that. So just to share with you, Joseph, where I'm going now, I would love to be able to get back to being able to share a couple of the stories of your time overseas. Would love to talk about those two, specifically getting to see the boat, the children.
Yes, that story is a big story. Yeah.
That I can crack. Then, and then kind of on the other side of that, when you were teaching in the jungle, right?
Yeah.
And the monkey game, I think telling those stories will be fun and will give a sense of kind of between the college, right, and the mentorship up until now.
I think you had asked me in the previous one, like, you know, how did I get there? How did I get to where I am now? And what were the travel, the 35 countries, all of that. So
yes, absolutely. And I think that's the best way to do it. I may let you speak briefly about your time in the fraternity, traveling around, because I think you to being able to talk about the network also feeds into, right, a piece of where you are. And Joseph, I've loved getting to hear your story about everything that you're doing now currently as a student of dean of student life. Holy mess. Couldn't even get that out correctly. And we've talked about the beginning of your journey, but we are missing a few years in between. I know you mentioned the 35 countries. And so I would love for you to bridge that gap for us and be able to share some stories of your time.
Sure. So right after I graduated graduate school, I actually had an opportunity to work as a consultant, a regional director for my fraternity. And so that position allowed me the opportunity to travel within the United States. I had a region that was fairly large, and for lack of a better term, it was the Louisiana Purchase, very large region of the United States. So it went from like the Mississippi River all the way to the Rocky Mountains, from as far south as Louisiana, Texas, to the upper peninsula of Michigan. And so I had about 26 different college campuses within that region that I would visit on an annual basis. And so I had a very unique opportunity to meet hundreds, if not thousands, of college men that were in my fraternal organization at these various institutions, but also the alumni that were working with the students in that specific region as well. And so my network grew tremendously as a result of that. And I was able to work with a huge, diverse population of students, rural students, first generation students, students in like urban communities and settings, and getting to hear their stories was adding so much wealth of information to me, and allowed me to become kind of like a chameleon and adapt and adjust how I introduce myself, how I spoke to students, how I was able to connect and build relationships with them. And then as a result, I used that in my career since then. I did have a unique opportunity after that position specifically to then go to Greece. I had a friend that was actually a member of my cohort in grad school who reached out to me and said, you know, I know that you love traveling and you've been to so many parts of the US. Would you ever consider wanting to work abroad? And for me, I was like, absolutely. And she said, well, what about working in Greece? And so I was like, sign me up. I did not know anything about Greece necessarily, or didn't know how to speak Greek, but I wanted experience. And so packed a bag and then went over to Thessaloniki, Greece, where I had a unique opportunity to work with about 150 first semester in college STEM students. So their first semester in college was spent in another country. Now that role was very multifaceted, and that experience allowed me to become the best professional and the better professional that I am today. I was thrown every kind of scenario you could imagine. So I mentioned the Ambumule and trekking up to Mount Olympus. I was in charge of on-campus experiences, off-campus excursions, but one unique experience was service learning. So I worked with nonprofit organizations in Greece, and students had a unique opportunity to go and do service, to do volunteer work in the country as part of their global experience course, and their service hour requirement. And the reason why we had this is so that students could really get an immersive experience in the Greek community, with local citizens. It was also the peak of the economic recession in Greece. And so I remember, I had a American Express purchasing card, and I was given a budget to do purchasing and spend in country, and it didn't even work. in
Oh my God, what did you do?
And so I had to become very creative. Lots of trips to the bank and the ATM, and learning how to barter, and trade, and all kinds, and then finding opportunities that were little to no cost for students. So snorkeling or going to the beach or hiking, things in nature in the local community, but then also service opportunities were a huge component to that. And so I mentioned that I had a lot of STEM students. One site visit in particular, were with our pre-dental students and our dental hygiene students. They would go and volunteer at the local dental clinic, and we're doing like tooth cleanings for free as a student, like an intern would, for a lot of refugees. There was a large population of Syrian refugees in the city that didn't have healthcare. And so my students were able to provide, dental service, cleaning, some first aid. Some of our nursing students were able to do things like simple blood work and blood pressure checks. But one example of a service project that the students had an opportunity to engage with was with a refugee camp. And so I took students to a site that was literally on the edge of the Aegean Sea. And there was one opportunity where we saw a raft come across the sea, across the ocean, in the middle of the morning. And these were Syrian citizens that basically fled their country during the height of the war. And they got on a raft. They didn't know how long they were going to be out at sea. And so we received them in country. And so me and the students pulled the raft out of the sea. There were kids on that raft, family members. They were drenched from being out at sea and in the open water. It had rained that week. They had been without food and water and warm clothing. And so we were able to provide them food and basic needs and essentials at that refugee camp. And we did a lot of processing with the students that had that experience about what it meant to be a refugee and what it meant to provide that support needed. And one story that I want to share about that was I had a unique table where there were toys and books, and any kid that was at the refugee camp had an opportunity to go and retrieve a book or retrieve a toy just for the time being, because they had left all of that behind. And so there was a little girl, and she had two younger brothers, and they stopped by the table. And, I was speaking with the translator, and I said, tell these kids that they can pick any item that they want from the table, and it's theirs to keep. They can play with it. And so the translator did that. And so the little girl looked at the table. There was dolls, there was coloring books, stuffed animals. And she said no to all of that. And instead she went and picked up a soccer ball and she tossed it over to her younger brother and they started playing soccer. And I told the translator, I said, she can also get something for herself if she would like to. And the little girl responded to the translator, and I'll say to the best of my ability, that it didn't matter what she got, if she had no one to play with. And so that's why she picked the soccer ball, so that she could play with her two younger siblings, something together. And for her, that's what mattered the most. It didn't matter what she had. And if she didn't have someone to play with, then it wasn't going to matter. And this was a little girl, maybe 10 years old. And what I learned in that moment was like, regardless of all the things that you have in life, family is probably the most important thing. And so these three kids didn't have their parents anymore. It was just the three of them to continue on with their lives and their journey. And the students that were volunteering with me at that refugee camp, witnessed it and experienced it. And a lot of those students came from very privileged backgrounds. They had an opportunity to study abroad and go to a private school. And now they're working directly with refugees that literally have nothing to their name. And so we processed that. The students reflected on it. They were able to document it in their video storytelling project. And for me, that's been one of my most memorable experiences working in higher education, and one that I will take with me for the rest of my life.
Of course, I'm over here wiping my tears. Goodness, that tugs on your heartstrings. And you had babies with you, right? I mean, their first semester of school, to have that experience is one thing, but to be able to experience refugees coming in and being able to be a part of that, and not only you getting to help them, but being able to see what we have here in America is not normal all the time, right? It is not common for everybody. And so I think it's so important. My oldest son has an opportunity this summer to go on a mission trip to Guatemala. And I'm so excited for that, because people need to see other countries. They need to see, they're actually going to go build a house for actually two or three houses for some families over there that week. But it takes a whole community to do something like that. And that is something that even your students, that is something that will stay with them forever, that they will remember, that they will be able to relive it. And it's something that brought that realistic piece to them of goodness, gratitude, right? I can be thankful for what I have. And I'm not saying that what we have is not okay, but being able to see that others don't makes you just a little more empathetic, a little more understanding. And maybe the next time you go to buy something, you will make the choice to think about somebody else and that may need something more. And as you mentioned too, that little girl, all she cared about was her family and taking care of them. And that is, materialistic things will never be more than the relationships that we build with our family and our close friends and our community, right? And again, bringing in that intentional choice to build relationships and help allow people in our lives, whether it's, family, our friends, our community, our mentors, our teachers, whatever that looks like, to help shape us into who we are supposed to be, which is fantastic. And so, Joseph, you just made me cry and mess up my mascara. Thank you so much. Are there any other stories that you still made just such an impact, even if it was something silly, from your journey as you visited other countries?
Yeah. So if I could, I would have stayed longer in Greece. But I mentioned that it was their peak of their economic recession. And so after the program ended, I had to make a decision where, what's next in my career? My visa had expired and they weren't renewing work visas for expats. And so actually I had to, what is called a forced exit. I had to flee the country. And so I had to, yeah. So I had to leave Greece and go to Bulgaria for a little bit, to do like last minute paperwork and, financial reconciliation before I went back to the States, but I couldn't do that in Greece. So I did it in Bulgaria, and I didn't speak Bulgarian. But I would highly recommend for those that are listening to go to Sofia, Bulgaria. It was a great place. I was there for a little bit, but then when I came back to the States, another mentor of mine reached out to me and said, "Hey, we've been kind of following your journey virtually, because I have an Instagram account that is called Traveling Essay Pro. And it's been just me taking photos and posting them about my journey living in different places." And so this mentor saw something that sparked their interest, like, "Hey, let's connect with this guy and see if he's interested in going to Malaysia to work on some leadership camps and leadership development for students in Malaysia." And so he reached out to me, and I was in between jobs at that time. And I said, "I have nothing else to do, so sure." And so I packed a different type of suitcase. This had all like tropical weather related attire. And so I then went to Kuala Lumpur, and I had a unique opportunity to help develop and launch some leadership camps for hundreds of students in Malaysia. And so there were 2 international schools that we worked with, and the leadership camps were basically like their orientation camps right before they started with the academic year. And they were in the middle of the jungle. And so I was facilitating workshops on things like effective communication and team building and conflict resolution and a lot of that soft skill development. And I remember one facilitated workshop. I was in a pavilion and all the students were kind of facing me. And out of nowhere, a monkey from the jungle just goes and attacks like this snack table and starts eating all of the food that was out for the students while I'm talking about things like, you know, if you're in a conflict with someone, here's how you de-escalate it. And so at that moment, it made me realize like any place can be a classroom for learning, but you also have to be adaptable and be flexible and nimble with the environment that you're in. And so I kind of paused. I was like a little freaked out. I was like, there's a wild animal like eating all the food in the middle of my workshop. And so I even asked the students, I was like, "Do we want to move? Do we want to relocate?" And they're like, "No, that's fine. It's normal." And I was like, "It's normal to have monkeys just show up in your classroom?" They're like, "Yeah, we're used to it. They live on the streets or like in our backyards or whatever." But to them, that was normal. That was their everyday, versus me, like an outsider, having to adjust and adapt to this new environment. And then also keep my cool and keep my composure as the educator in that space. There were also some risk management things that I had to navigate through with that job. Like it was the peak of monsoon season. And so it flooded pretty heavily in that area. We were in the middle of the rainforest. And so the site was at the bottom of a valley. And so all the rainwater was going down into our campsite where we had these leadership camps. And so we had to become very creative in terms of seeking higher ground, finding shelter that was not wet. There was also no way for buses to go into the valley from the outside community because it was flooded. And so, yeah, really, really navigating like the elements and Mother Nature and what to do in a natural disaster when there are so many students in your care. And because of that, I have really been at ease with a lot of other situations that have happened at other places from that experience that I've had working in Southeast Asia.
I'm sure. First of all, monkeys are cute. Well, terrifying when you're not expecting it. I mean, he just loved your lecture. He's like, I want to be a part of this. I love that so much. Now, I know you mentioned some challenges, but you were able to overcome. For someone who is walking through a challenge, whether it be in a classroom, whether it be in their career, whatever that looks like, what are kind of some words of wisdom or advice that you could give to them?
I think as anyone interacts or faces an obstacle or a challenge in their life, is to know the difference between what they can control and what they cannot. So you can control your reaction to something. And so being very mindful of your automatic emotional response is helpful. So if there's chaos around you, how am I being in control of myself and my emotions within that chaos? There's a quote where it's to the effect of like, as long as there's no chaos within, then there should be no chaos throughout. And so if you can maintain your own level of composure and calmness in a chaotic situation, then you're able to use reason and logic when it comes to decision making. And then also, if there are people that are impacted by your decision, they're going to look at you and trust you based on how you respond to something. And so it's really important to know what you can and cannot control. So the monkey example, I had no control over what that monkey was going to do. I am not a trained monkey expert. And that monkey was going to eat the food regardless. But I did have control in how I responded to that. So instead of me freaking out, which could have then resulted in the students freaking out, I asked the students who were experts in that environment. I said, should I stop? Should I keep going? What should you do? And then also leaning on their level of expertise. And so they were like, no, it's fine. This is normal. Like, leave it alone and it'll go away. Perfect. And so, because I knew I couldn't control that, but the students taught me a valuable lesson that I can learn from them just as much as they can learn from me. One of the organizations that I do consulting and facilitation work with, called Leadership, teaches that everyone is a teacher and everyone is a learner. And in that moment, the students taught me how to be calm, cool, and collected, even when there's a monkey in the room.
That is fantastic and great advice. You're right. There's a lot of things that we want to control, but we can't. And focusing on that does not allow us to solve the problem, right? You cannot bring a solution if you are focusing on the wrong piece.
Right.
And so being able to step far enough back that you can see does allow you to assess, to figure out that next move. So Joseph, it has been just an absolute joy to hear your story, to hear all that y'all are doing at Midland College and all that, the experiences and the people within your life. Just the result of those shaping you into who you are today, who is pretty stinking fabulous. So I'm so grateful. Now, would not be a true episode of Heather's Most Precious if I did not ask you. So Joseph, what do you find most precious?
So for me, when I hear the term precious, I automatically think of a diamond and what it means to be a diamond. You know, a diamond is considered to be the most precious gemstone, but it didn't start off that way. And so for me, I think what I think is the most precious is the process to become the diamond. Diamonds are only formed by the amount of pressure that is kind of forced or imposed on that piece of coal. You know, was this thing that exists, and with a certain amount of pressure, then it becomes something more brilliant. And so as humans, the more obstacles that we overcome, the barriers that we face and the challenges that we're able to encounter, all of that pressure makes us that more precious in the long run and adds to our level of story. And as a result, we become that diamond in the long term.
Best answer ever. I love that so much because I think pressure tends to have a negative connotation. And so being able to realize, just like with a pearl being produced, right, within the clay, it is something bad happened to get this beautiful person. Right. And as we've talked a lot about, you have the negative, you have the positive, and finding the balance is good. But if you're walking through a negative season, do not miss the opportunity to look around and find the beauty, because it will happen. And I feel like, goodness, you miss the joy of the journey if you wait until you're on the other side and look back instead of being able just to be aware of your surrounding while you're going through it, not promising that every day is going to be beautiful, but there is beauty within it. You can make the most of it if you choose to. And so I love that reminder that a diamond is coming, even if you feel pressed now.
It's only a season.
It is. And definitely not the ending, right? It shall pass one day. Well, Joseph, again, thank you so much for being a part. And for our listeners, I hope that you have found some encouragement and hope and been able to also hear some ways that you can help, whether it's with Midland College or whether it's with students in your community. I hope that as you have listened and as you have gathered that hope, that you will remember as you carry on to be kind, to be grateful, and to encourage. And we'll see you back next week for another episode of Heather's Most Precious. Bye, y'all.
Heather's Most Precious is brought to you with love by the Hendrickson Agency, an insurance agency serving all of Georgia and Tennessee. The Hendrickson Agency, properly protecting your most precious possessions. Support for Heather's Most Precious is provided by Study.com, which offers SAT and ACT study materials and even has resources for AP and college credit courses. Listeners of Heather's Most Precious get 30% off their first 3 months of any subscription level with offer code PRECIOUS. Just go to Study.com and use offer code PRECIOUS at checkout. Heather's Most Precious is produced by Chattanooga Podcast Studios and is part of the Podnooga Network. Find out more at ChattanoogaPodcastStudios.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of Heather's Most Precious.